I'm Dave Robertson, I'm the Investment Director at Scottish Woodlands. We're on Kinrara Estate today, the Lost Forest, and this is a project that we have worked up for our client over the last 4 years, since early 2021. We are talking about this today because the property is about to change hands and our involvement with the property is about to end. I thought it was really important because of the challenges we've had with this site, but also because of the really good quality of the outcome of what's been achieved. I thought it was really important that we just covered off our involvement in the site and how that's developed over time and sort of hand over our thoughts on how the site has developed. The main trees on site really reflect what we see in the natural landscape. So silver birch on the lower ground, Scots pine slightly higher up. On wet ground we have downy birch, willow, rowan, and really what we're trying to do is recreate what nature would have had in the first instance, plant the right tree in the right place to get the best outcomes. This is an example of Scots pine that's been planted on the site. This tree was planted here last year, 2024 in the spring. And it's just a really good example of how well adapted this tree is to this kind of site and how well that tree has grown. It would have been planted as a tree around about this size last year, 4 to 6 inches perhaps. And this is now wearing on for 35-40 centimetres tall. So really strong growth, really healthy needles, and most of the crop around it is looking very similar. So yeah, delighted with this, really good outcome. I think overall we've had quite a few challenges on the site. Our main challenge was the spring of 2023, so phase 1 of planting, which was 320 hectares or so, was planted in the spring of 2023, which turned out to be one of the driest springs on record. That gave us some significant issues with drought, and as a result we lost roughly 50% of the trees on the site. By the back end of 2023 we were already on site replanting the areas that had failed. That was substantially completed in spring 2024 as well, and we see the trees around us today are absolutely thriving in this environment again. I think PR has been a bit of a challenge and a lot of misinformation around about the site. A lot of people coming in with their own views of what should and or shouldn't have happened and how it should or shouldn't have been done. That presented us with some challenges as we went through. When the trees died and we had that big failure in 2023, we very quickly set about putting that right. So surveys to work out exactly what had died, and then obviously informing our client, making sure that they were aware of the implications of that. The Forestry Grant Scheme contract, which our clients have for the site, obligated them to make sure that the trees were planted to the correct stocking density to be successful at year 5, which this site now will be because the work that we put in place has ensured that. We took a pause on some of the higher elevation trees that were planted later in 2023 as montane planting areas, as they weren't as badly impacted by the drought. That's proved to be a practical approach, as many of those trees are now regrowing and show signs of full recovery. The peatland restoration work on site here has been ongoing since 2021, so we started with an initial 100 hectares of restoration happening in the farthest part of the estate, and that concentrated on some of the worst degraded areas of peatland, so lots of peat hags, lots of areas that were very badly degraded over the years. And then in subsequent cohorts we moved into areas that had been drained in the 1950s for agricultural production. Tens upon tens of kilometres of drains which have been restored on the site, and the areas that we're looking onto here, we can just see the remnants of that now, where these ditches have been stitched back up. We've stopped that water leaving the site, and those peatlands will be restored back to their natural condition again as that water's retained and the peatland starts to regenerate. I think the misinformation about the site really frustrated us because of the impact it had on staff and it had on morale for the people who are working in this. Our staff are passionate professional people. They really want these sites to succeed. And we had some challenges here with weather, which meant that it was difficult in the first year. But the misinformation was really wide. We had everything from a film called The Last Keeper, suggesting that everything that was planted here was commercial conifer, which just simply it's not. There's not a commercial conifer planted on the site. But that gained widespread traction and became the narrative for the site for quite a long time. That also brought with it additional negative coverage of how the planting was and the success of the site. You know, again, that just hasn't borne through to what we see on the site today, which is, you know, a really well-established, fantastic looking property. What we have on site now are 800 hectares of approved forestry planting on Kinrara, of which around about 420 hectares has been completed. We have some really extensive peatland restoration that's been carried out in the site. That's been carried out a combination of Strathcollie as the project developer and McGowan's as the contractor through the whole delivery of that project. That's really important to meet the Scottish Government's targets. Peatland restoration, we have a target of 250,000 hectares over the next 10 years. And 500 hectares has been achieved here under BrewDog's ownership. And I think that's really important. As we move on as a business from this site, when the ownership changes, I think it's time for us to reflect on how the whole site has developed and what our part has been to play in that. Personally, I'm very proud of what our company has done. We've had our challenges, as we've talked about, but I think the outcomes here are exceptional. The trees that failed in 2023 are now back up and thriving. The peatland's been restored. The habitat is exactly as we would hope it to look for a woodland which is 2-3 years old. Really developing well, and I think it's an excellent legacy for us, for our company and for our staff who've been involved in the development of this site to leave behind.